Hi, mamas and dads and others who may find themselves here. This is a rare episode of Reflections Along the Way. Actually, that's what I published most of in the early days of this podcast. Were just my own thoughts. So this isn't an interview. It's me sharing about things I've learned about the destabilizing experience of parenting a trans-identified child. And in this reflection, I share a taste of what I've come to call the paradox of motherhood, or how to use destabilizing parenting experiences to grow ourselves up. Clearly, this is a topic that I am passionate about, and this particular presentation, I'll call it, is something that I'm working on for my website. So I thought I'd try it out here in audio form for you all. This is my take one. It is actually set to slide, so there are visuals to accompany this audio. I think it's sufficient as an audio presentation, but ultimately I'd like this to be something that I put on my website. So eventually, if you're interested, you'll be able to follow along on the slides. And I'll let you know there is so much more to say on each of the elements that I describe in this presentation, and I could literally go on for hours. I've had to trim it down to the essentials. I definitely want it to be in bite-sized chunks. And so, I've certainly shared much about this on the Stoic Mom Project Substack, and will continue to do so. I might be doing more of this audio content and potentially some visual content as well for the YouTube channel. So, with that in mind, let's jump right in. Welcome to this exploration of what I'm calling the paradox of motherhood. If you're here, there's a good chance that you're the mom or dad of someone who has assumed a trans identity, or you are in some way connected to that cultural phenomenon, and have found it a destabilizing experience. And this idea of the paradox of motherhood was born out of my own experience as the parent of somebody who assumed a trans identity, my daughter. And I'll give you a little more detail about my experience as we move through this presentation. But this is something that is on my mind all the time these days. I think many of you know that I've taken a pretty different tack when it comes to my relationship to this circumstance of parenting a trans-identified child. I think that's why many people follow my work, is because they're looking for something different. They're looking to have a different experience, something that doesn't feel so futile and crazy making, to be honest, which is what drove me to think about and create the content that is put out by the Stoic Mom Project. So this presentation is hosted by the Stoic Mom Project. I am Stoic Mom, and I'll give you a little bit more information about me here in a few minutes. But I just wanted to quickly introduce the topic, again, the paradox of motherhood, and just acknowledge that as mothers, we often embark on motherhood as a sort of redemption journey, I believe. We think we can give our children what was missing in our own childhoods, and we determine to ensure their lives look a certain way. And this is how we know we've succeeded as mothers. But I want to challenge you to consider that what if the true work of motherhood is actually something different? That it's not about our child's path as much as we like to think, but that really their challenges and what those challenges will demand of us will mature us through the process. What if the inevitable pain of motherhood, which comes when life will force us to let go of the sense that our children are extensions of ourselves and have their own unique life arcs, what if this painful separation is purposeful to our own growth and capacity to become whole? So this paradox, I think, is key and understanding how destabilizing parenting experiences like what likely brought you here can actually be the gateway to our own evolution. So this paradox that I'm describing is at the heart of the work that we do at the Stoic Mom Project. I'm Stoic Mom, a parent educator, certified Jungian depth coach, the founder of the Stoic Mom Project. I also launched and host the podcast Conversations Along the Way, and I co-host the Attachment Matters podcast. My work is rooted in the study of Jungian philosophy, Stoicism, attachment theory, and ancient wisdom traditions. But most importantly, I'm also a mother who was destabilized when I learned that one of my two beautiful children had assumed a trans identity. My own journey of ongoing growth and transformation as a mother now informs everything I do for the Stoic Mom Project. So why, and what do I mean by using destabilizing parenting experiences as context for growth? And I think we can tackle this by exploring the alternative. I think that this circumstance tends to completely turn our world upside down. I know many of you can relate to this. When we discover that our children has assumed a trans identity, this tends to terrify us. We can see that potentially devastating pathway. And this discovery can shake us to our core, destabilizing everything we thought we knew about parenting, about the world, and about ourselves. I know many of us have lost trust and faith in the institutions that we think are here to support us. And frankly, for me, it was like so many of the sci-fi movies from my childhood seemed to be playing out. Sometimes I felt like I was in the Stepford Wives or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where my friends had seemingly been snatched and replaced with mindless copies of themselves who seemed determined to mess with me and make me think I'd lost my own mind. My husband was in his own crisis over our daughter's identity, unable to support me in my futile efforts to shut it down. And the impotence that I experienced in the face of this challenge seemed like it might just destroy me. The desperation that I could feel in my body, it seemed to threaten to burst out of my chest. And it drove me to behave erratically, raging sometimes at the futility I was experiencing, and even causing me to lose my shit, frankly, a few times with my own children, showing them and me a side of myself that I didn't even know existed. And I was losing them, my family, in my desperation to fix what was happening because it was so threatening to my own identity and stability. I was repelling them. I could also sense their emotional distance, and that scared me even more. So I'm grateful that I could see this vicious cycle that I was caught in and recognize the damage that it was doing. If I wanted to keep my family, I would need to find another way. So instead of focusing on controlling the circumstances, I needed to figure out how to regain stable ground. It's funny because when I launched the Stoic Mom Project, I'd say I was just at the beginning of this new phase for me. And through my work in this project, I discovered what I believe are three crucial aspects necessary to reorient ourselves to life. And I think this is something the universe was demanding of me and might be demanding of you. I knew that if I resisted, I would become a victim to this circumstance, consumed with aching sadness and a sense of failure, and likely doomed to depression, potentially for the rest of my life. So I created this to share these aspects that I think are integral to this paradox of motherhood, that I think are necessary to the transformation that reorients us to this precious gift of life. Not as something that should be or even can be controlled, but as a dynamic process meant to grow us up to be the mature elders that humanity and our children so desperately need us to be. To find a way forward in this process, we must first confront some painfully difficult truths. The first of those is recognizing the illusion of control that most of us are unconsciously working very hard to maintain. We'll then explore the dark night of the soul, that it's meant to shatter this illusion and bring us to our knees. We'll also talk about the importance of finding faith in something larger than ourselves to relieve us of the heavy burdens that would otherwise crush us. And I'll even direct you to the map, that which can serve as your guide to navigating this transformation into what feels like a whole new life with renewed relationships and energy to handle whatever it might throw our way. Because if this has taught us anything, I imagine it's that life could blindside us at any moment. So to start, we've got to examine this illusion of control. For many of us, motherhood begins with an image of a picture-perfect life, a belief that if we create the right conditions, a perfect home, perfect parenting, perfect childhood for our kids, everything will turn out the way we envision, and we can spare our children the pain that we endured. I think we live in a time where this illusion is stronger than ever. Many of us have worked hard to be able to create and maintain these picture-perfect lives, and the narrative is such that anyone who works hard enough can do the same. So when external circumstances come along and mess with this illusion, we're indeed blindsided, especially when it comes to our children. If you're anything like me, this circumstance thrust you into a constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. I remember employing all three, fighting with my loved ones and with reality, and with institutions, doctors, all that. I fantasized about fleeing from my family to free myself of the pain of the circumstance, convincing myself I was the problem and my family would be better off without me. Luckily, I didn't believe this part of myself that I often refer to as my escape complex. And other times, I would just curl up in the fetal position, keening in my pain and impotence. And it wasn't until much later that this Anais Nin quote made any sense to me. I didn't realize that to truly mature, I needed this illusion of how much I could control the life of my family to be shattered. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Our view of the world is shaped by our internal state. And when that state is shaken, we are forced to reevaluate not only how we parent, but how we see ourselves and the world around us. This circumstance has a way of pitting us against the culture. It leads us to feeling gaslit. We can see the potential devastation in our children's past, so we desperately try to force our children into a mold that we think is safer. But what happens when nothing works? When attempts to change the situation or fix our children only lead to more isolation and confusion. This emotional turmoil I describe is often referred to as the dark night of the soul. And the anguish in the dark night becomes all-encompassing. Destabilizing circumstances will thrust us into a sort of initiation, and it will torture us. It's meant to. The feelings in our body will seem unbearable and we'll feel a bit like we're dying. And frankly, that's the point. Parts of us need to die off. Mainly, these are the parts that want to keep us stuck in this illusion of control. This term, the dark night of the soul, it's not new. Yet this normal human experience that has been identified in past generations has become pathologized in today's world, much like adolescence. I think this might make our dark nights even more frightening than in times past, because we're not expecting them. No one has prepared us for this type of intense emotional pain, but it's precisely this discomfort that becomes our chrysalis. Only through this disillusion of who we thought we were can we transform into who we're meant to be. This becomes crucial work, not only for ourselves, but for our children who need us to walk through our own flames so we can tolerate watching them walk through theirs. When we reach our lowest point, when all our attempts to control the situation fail, and we've been beaten down in this futility, we're likely to find ourselves quite literally on our knees. We have been made weak, humbled, forced to face our own humanity and frailty, and to acknowledge that we don't have the power to direct external circumstances. Life will make sure we know that the only true freedom we have is in how we respond to its cruel treatment. True maturity is in the development of our inner resources and the capacity to embrace and work with whatever life drops in our lap. Otherwise, we'll wear ourselves out, completely exhausting ourselves in order to keep up appearances, not just for others, but to try to convince ourselves that we deserve that perfect life that we seem to believe others have. And if only we do everything right, we can have too. But none of this is true. And ultimately, life will demand your surrender. Until your knees finally hit the floor, you're just playing at life, and on some level you're scared because you know you're just playing. This moment when our knees hit the floor is pivotal. This is when we confront our deepest fears, our illusions of control, and where we begin to truly engage with the life-changing work of, and there are so many names for this, transformation, individuation, evolution, becoming who we truly are. It is a painful task that we will avoid for as long as we can get away with avoiding it. But eventually, that call is going to come. And I think for many of us, that call came in this circumstance. As we grapple with this deep transformation, we realize the need for faith to anchor us. I love the words of Dr. Lisa Miller to describe what it is that we're seeking. And I think it's this sense that we are loved, held, guided, and never alone. Without faith in something larger than ourselves, it's impossible to let go of our need to control. But when we can trust that something larger is at play, whether it's a spiritual faith and an intelligent plan, the unknowable wisdom of the universe and the archetypal energies, or the deeper forces of life, and trust in its blueprint for us, can we feel safe enough to surrender. As someone who very consciously rejected religion, this has been a tremendous gift to me. I remember in the darkest times, desperately wishing that I had something to pray to. Because it is faith that alleviates the heavy burden that feels like the weight of the world. Without some faith that there's some purpose to all of this, we'll be compelled to control. Mothers naturally seem inclined to feel deeply responsible for the well-being of our loved ones, compelled to nurture with the intent of alleviating suffering. Faith doesn't require us to have all the answers, but it does create the space for us to open up and allow life to guide us, and the lightness to get back up off our knees. So I know I mentioned the archetypes, which can offer us some guidance along the way. Embedded in all of us is the mother archetype. And this archetype forms our expectations of our own mother, but also demands that we embody it when it's our turn to provide for these expectations in our children. And like with all the archetypes, it invites us into a complicated dance where it's impossible to perfectly balance both the light and dark aspects of the archetype. Being conscious of the mother tendencies can help us recognize when we're suffocating those we love. I love this description by Kim Kranz. That can also hurt to read and recognize in yourself that the mother contains both light and dark aspects of the feminine. With the best of intentions, the mother wraps her loving arms around her creations and begins to grip what she meant to set free. The mother both nurtures and prohibits growth. She gives, yet clings. She creates, yet restricts. Amid this complex energy, the mother holds the key to the eternal challenge of love. This duality is part of our own growth. As mothers, we inevitably embody both the nurturer and the restrictor. And this is normal. This is archetypal energy, contains both the light and the dark. We don't get to have one without the other. Our task is in finding the paradox and learning how to do this dance while having grace for our human foibles and that we're going to mess it up sometimes. But the work we're doing now is about recognizing and integrating all of these aspects of ourselves, navigating our own contradictions, right? We can use these as a map to better understand who we are as humans, including what's in our shadow, and to guide us toward integration and wholeness. So I know some of this can sound a little esoteric. As mentioned at the beginning of this, I'm a Jungian depth coach, and so much of the work I do is understanding and working with the unconscious, which plays a big role in the experience we're having. So if we can learn to do that work, it can really change how we're showing up in life. I do spend quite a bit of time in my content helping to develop understanding about this relationship with the unconscious. This is also much of the work I do with my one-on-one clients. So understanding and working with the mother archetype is one piece of the map, which resides within each of us. And so you'll probably be relieved to know, maybe, this might just be confusing, when I tell you that the map exists for you already. It's within you. Getting to better know ourselves with grace and compassion provides our own custom inner guidance system for navigating transformation as well as external circumstances. Learning to tune in may be one of the most difficult and also one of the most valuable things you'll ever develop. And the level of challenge here is going to vary from person to person. It has a lot to do with our own childhoods and how we perceived the world around us when our personalities were developing. We all have the capacity, but since this is not something our culture values, most of us are pretty disconnected from our intuition. But let me assure you, there is great wisdom in the body if we have a healthy relationship with our feelings and the various parts of our psyche and know how to read and work with our own signals. Using our body's signals, we can clarify our own values, understanding what truly matters to us as mothers and individuals. If we're not living in alignment with our own values, we'll experience chronic discomfort that often presents as physical symptoms. Self-knowledge is key to our health and energy levels. Another strangely beautiful piece of the map is what our children will bring alive in us. If we can reorient to our children's behavior, the stuff that really triggers us, we can use this information to discover what is in our own shadow that needs to be integrated into our consciousness. Throughout my content, I often quote the novel Circe by Madeline Miller, when the main character says, "Perhaps no parent can truly see their children. They see only the reflection of their own faults." Recognizing these feelings that get triggered as something in our unconscious that wants our attention, we can work with this content rather than being swept away in the feelings and reacting harshly to our children. And changing the way we respond, we model maturity and self-containment for our kids who need this from us, their mothers, to help them know how to be in the world. This wild, cruel, exquisitely beautiful life that we get to experience. So speaking of life, with this new relationship to our pain, we are forever changed. Difficult circumstances aren't something to be avoided at all costs because we don't think we deserve them. Rather, we recognize them as the very catalysts that help us discover the source within us for resilience and compassion. They break our hearts open so we can experience all of life's exquisite richness rather than exhausting ourselves trying to limit our emotional experience. This leaves us with more energy and capacity to be nourished by life's beauty and joy that comes in equal measure as the pain and tragedy it will dish out to us. We realize, much like the dark and light aspects of the mother complex, that all of life exists on similar spectrums. It's in finding and living in the paradox that we live in our full capacity as compassionate humans with the presence and maturity that our children need from us, and that ripples out and impacts the world in ways we can't even begin to fathom, but that offer hope and optimism for the future. The invitation at the Stoic Mom Project is to let this circumstance transform you into a lighthouse, a beacon of wisdom and resilience in these stormy times. And I suspect, like me, many of you will find what feels like your purpose as a result of this work. The dark night of the soul serves as a call to let go of what you think you know about life and what it means to be a mature human being, to reorienting toward what truly energizes you and fills your life with meaning. There's so much more to be said about this paradox and the difficulty we have in today's world when it comes to the pressures of parenting, resisting our own maturity, our addiction to comfort, our fear of mortality, and how culture has intensified our fear of our own shadow, and more. Through my study of this process and today's culture, I've identified plenty of obstacles that make this harder than it might normally be. And tackling these and helping people understand and work with the obstacles instead of being put off by them is also part of the Stoic Mom Project. So, as this project continues its own evolution in our commitment to help mamas move through this paradox of motherhood and evolve into who they're meant to be, I'll share more of what I've discovered about these obstacles and how to see the obstacle as the way. But this has gotten plenty long enough. You're probably sick of listening to my voice. But this is meant to just give you a taste of what I mean by the paradox of motherhood. And if this has resonated for you and you recognize yourself on this journey, you may sense that you're ready to stop fighting the inevitable transformation. I've come to believe that this is as much a part of the human experience as puberty, and to resist it is to suspend your own development and perpetuate the torture. So whether you're still feeling crushed by the anguish of the dark night of the soul, or you're in search of something to place your faith in, or you're feeling ready to tackle your shadow work that your map is offering you, you might feel like it's time to find your way forward. So I can't do the work for you. You'll have your own map, and it'll be different than mine was. But I have been trained to help you find yours. And I've been and continue to go through this process myself. I now consider it my mission to support moms on this path, and I'd be honored to visit with you and see if I might act as a guide in this process, helping you to see your own blind spots and to know how to work with what you discover about yourself. We may discover that you're further along than you thought, or that you already have the resources that will support you in your own evolution as a woman, a mother. So if you're watching this on my website and you'd like to set up a time to talk with me, you can click any of the book a call buttons on the page. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, the link to the page can be found in the show notes. Thanks so much for taking the time today to learn about the paradox of motherhood. And I want you to know that whatever you're experiencing is normal, acceptable, valid, and to hang in there, mama. You're doing a hard thing. And that even if it seems you've dead-ended in this maze, it's possible to find your way to the light at the end of this tunnel. You're not alone. Much love. Stoic Mom. All right, so to wrap up this reflection along the way, as I mentioned, this was take 1 of the Paradox of Motherhood. I'd welcome your feedback. I do definitely want to note that everybody's experience, I know I said this at the end of the presentation, but wherever you are in your experience is right where you need to be. Where you go from here, I think that's up to you as well. The last thing I want anybody to do is to beat themselves up with my content. Very important to me that I share my experience and that moms recognize the invitation in this. I think the world needs more peace and stability, and that this comes from doing the inner work. So, a huge thank you again for taking the time to listen. Please leave comments in the comment section. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. I'm open to all of it. I can take it all. I'm grateful for you. This is coming out in November of 2024. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I hope that you are taking some time this month to appreciate the preciousness of this life and loving on your families. Take care, and please don't give up on the light at the end of that tunnel.